Whoops. We're starting another program here for E-Rotary and transcribed from Nome by your illustrious president, Leo B. Rasmussen. A little bit of history, of course. We're up to May now and moving along. Little changes which may not mean too much to you, depending on how well you can see, but on the 3rd of May, 1915, the U.S. Congress on the 4th of March, 1915, grants to the Territory of Alaska 4 sections of land in the Tanana Valley as a site for the Agricultural College and School of Mines. On this day, the Alaska Territorial Legislature accepts the grant of land authorized by Congress, creates a corporation, appropriates $60,000 for construction of necessary buildings and purchases of equipment. Man, that wouldn't even get the paperwork done today. And so begins the University of Alaska. On the 4th of May in 1741, Captain Vitus Bering called a council to determine their course on the voyage to America, which, of course, you know, ends up with a very short, brief sighting of the mainland, quote-unquote, an island on the south side of Alaska, and turns and runs back to meet up with his death on one of the last islands in the Aleutians. 5th of May, Belmore Brown is born on June 9th, 1880 at Staten Island, New York. A renowned artist and writer, testifies before the U.S. Senate Committee on Territories in favor of Senate Bill 5716, a bill to establish the Mount McKinley National Park in the Territory of Alaska. He dies at Rye, New York on the 2nd of May, 1954. In 1925, Victor Fischer, town planner, professor, born in Berlin, Germany, May 5th, 1924, marries Gloria Rubenstein in 1944, town planner, Peterborough for New Hampshire, in 1949 and 1950. He's a town site planner for BLM in Anchorage in 1950 through 52, planning director for Anchorage in 1952 to 1955, executive secretary of the League of Alaskan Cities in 1953 to 1956, and of course that also grows up to be the Alaska of municipal governments. Community planning consultant for the municipality of Anchorage from 1955 to 1957. And out of the blue, this outsider has waltzed in and becomes a delegate to the Constitutional Convention in 1955 and 56. He serves in the Territorial House of Representatives, 1957 to 59, Director of Planning and Urban Renewal and Assistant Executive Director for ASHA in 1957 to 1961, receives a Littauer Fellowship in Public Administration at the University of Harvard, 1961 to 62, Assistant Administrator for U.S. Housing and Home Finance Agency and Director, Office of Metropolitan Development, U.S. HSUD in Washington, D.C. from 62 to 66. He's Director of ISGR, University of Alaska, Professor of Political Science, University of Alaska Fairbanks, 1966 to present. He's still with us today and still pushing things forward. 1935, in May, 5th of May, the first group of laborers, colonists arrive at Seward on board the steamship St. Michael, but due to a measles outbreak on board, they are quarantined on board for a week. 1942, a 20-man civilian conservation crew from Ketchikan prepared quarters on Annette, better known for that island, for an advanced group of U.S. Army Corps of Engineers who would build an airfield during 1941-42 under commander of Major George Nold. Canada. Got that. He was from Canada. And Canada offers to man the field and had its number 115 Fighter Squadron in place on this date, the first such ever Canadian force based in a U.S. territory. On the 6th of May, 1831, Ferdinand P. von Marangel reports to the directors of his inspection tour of Kodiak this summer. Among the company employees are fragile old people, entirely incapable of working, obligated with families, employees that are complete burden for the colonies. Their debts not only were not reduced, but in fact multiplied, excusing debts and releasing these people to go to Russia would be very much lead to a multitude of problems for the board of directors. The board of directors ran the Alaska-Russia, or the American-Russian Company. And they did not exist here in Alaska, needless to say. That is why I preferred to release some of these invalids, having allowed them to settle on a Fognak, an island on the Aleutian chain, and to use a whole year's salary and rations to become established, and with the passing of a year they must lose their aid and provision themselves. In 1880, Tolbert Patton Scott, miner born in Morgantown, North Carolina, marries Valley Wilson on April 1st, 1914, lived on a farm, went to Seattle, Washington, via St. Louis, Missouri in 1901, and he worked in lumber camps in Washington from 01 to 06, went to Nome in 06, miner in the Nome area, 2 decades, part-time for Lohman Brothers, lived in Solomon until family reached school age, then moving to Nome, served in the Territorial House of Representatives 1922 to 1939 and 1943 to 1945. Exceptional. Very few people back in those days served long periods of time in Territorial House. He then went on to be a territorial senator from 1954 to 1959. He dies in the Pioneer home in Sitka, February 17, 1961. The Alaska Highway Pioneer Road project was more than one commander could direct effectively, and the northern sector was in charge of General Hogue, and Colonel James O'Connor was assigned to command the southern sector. Both of them had long distinguished Army engineering careers. Hogue for building the pontoon bridges under the German shell fire in World War I, and O'Connor for tunneling Fortress Corregidor. 1964, lease sale of oil exploration sites, Nets Tyonek, $12 million. Again in the second lease, another $2.7 million, after long struggle to get a provision for proceeds from their lands. 1999, Margaret Swanberg dies in Sequim, Washington. She spent more than 25 years as Nome's public health nurse before retiring in 1978. Having also served at Mount Edgecombe Hospital in Sitka, she trained the first group of Alaska Native girls to be nurses. She was always available and the best go-to nurse when things were not right. I can attest to that. Another week has gone by. It's been a pleasure trying to update you a little bit that Alaska's history is 350 to 400 years old, only most of us never bother to learn it. Thanks, and see you next week.